Good afternoon. This is October 21st. The many global events that will be very interesting to see the work of the the organization of the BRICS nations taking place in Russia. I want to open up more of my background and what I am creating. First of all, the short history is that I was born in Shanghai in 48, raised in Macau, the Portuguese colony next to Hong Kong between 52 and 62, where I become baptized as Roman Catholics and opened up to the languages from Latin and Greek, and also at that time, English. And from 62, we have emigrated from Macau, Hong Kong to Brazil. And that opening up even more of my exposure to the area of languages, and very much so in the Latin, Roman area. So from that point of further education with the Salesians, the same order I have in Macau, exposure to Portuguese, to the Latin and Greek in serving Mass. And it just, with the environment, was so conducive to learning. Plus, I have always been curious. Well, basically, who isn't in that age of the 60s, when our only visual arts and visual culture was the American Hollywood, the music from the jazz, and then onto the era of the time in I was Presley, and then the Beatles, the Beach Boys, and so on and so forth. I think to give everybody a little background where I'm using most effectively, and I think I will be writing and speaking more about the cultural sphere. Language allow me to step into the different sphere, and this complements by what I'm saying cross-cultural. And even though there's no such good translation in the language in Portuguese, cross-cultural. So what I use is become called multiculturalização, the multiculturation. Okay, then I would talk about this, the cultural sphere, because when you do speak the several languages, when you step into that ambience, that environment, you pay the same respect, whatever comes consciously or subconsciously, that you pay your respect to that cultural sphere. And no different than the youngsters when we play sports is one culture, and when we go into classroom is another. Dining, I talk about in the boarding school. But in my particular case, I have stepped into my own households into 1 to 3 Chinese dialects. If my mother played mahjong with the ladies, they speak Cantonese, and another table speaking Mandarin, some mix. And my father was a French graduate from the Sorbonne in Paris, so his friends, schoolmates, speaking of our teenage life in Brazil, were one of his friend's wife is Francois, who I never heard her speaking Portuguese. So because to the accommodation of Francois, my father's 2 other friends, I just call them Uncle Lin, Uncle Shi, and they converse in French, where I have the communions in English and Chinese and in Portuguese with our teenagers going into the parties, time and period of the music of the Beatles, the Monkees, the rock and roll, the Beach Boys. So they go to different schools, and I have always wanted the desire, the hunger to remain in Brazil, to know about Brazil, maybe the Western world, the cowboy of the Western frontier of the US have superimposed into my Western idea of the Brazilian West, and with the engagement of my particular school, the Salesians Order, who had contributed tremendously to this segment. Even the post-colonialism about education involving learning, we go about inculturation of their culture and the natives from our group of culture, and eventually there was a term coming into play called inculturation. In Portuguese, we call it inculturação. With the Vatican, when one of my best friends turned into the bishop in the Amazons, had a mandate in 2008 and asking the clergy, asking the instructor, the teachers to foster the education about inculturation. That means reflecting back their past, their ancestors, and their whole other culture before they meet up with the westernized, the Portuguese-speaking, the white culture. And in this particular segment, I'm talking, which I've posted writing into the background, what are the subject matters. And I hope they will not be confusing to you, because it is not. It's because looking in the sphere, in a very airy bubble, sometimes they're linked, attached, and hybrid. Other time, they keep floating on the perimeters of each of the cultural sphere. So here's my topic. It's a cross-cultural institute I have created. It's about languages, about cultures, and about engagement, which is continue to be most fascinating. And the other one I would talk about, sharing the same personality, Paul Yi. I will speak of my creation of the communication system, counseling system also called 3 Cs, which communication dynamics, communication analytica, and then with the core in college at the university at that time, I created a cultural sphere just to suit all my students, their focus with academic counseling, along with the interpersonal communications or personal psychology. 45 years later, and with the partial interruption in 2008, when I went into the interiors of Amazon, where my old friend, best friend, Bishop Zhou today become known to the world, maybe less known to the world, but to the entire Brazilian country, became the Bispo dos Índios. He became the Bishop of Indians. And in part, I went to his region, which is the city called São Gabriel de Cachoeira, which is 70 kilometers south of the equator line. North of that, there's where the Yanomami natives are. And from the margin of the Rio Negro, the upper Rio Negro, there was 30 plus ethnic natives, with the 8 priests administering the different villages and the bishop. And in that particular time in Poland, I was very well exposed to the brilliance of the former Bishop Acevedo before Bishop Zhou. Zhou and I share the same heritage. Ethnically, we both were born in Shanghai, except that his family were generations, have the linkage with the Roman Catholic Church, where mine wasn't. And from Shanghai, we all moved to Hong Kong and Macau, respectively, because the Chinese Civil War, the coming down, the Chiang Kai-shek from Taiwan eventually retreated to Taiwan, and the Communist China of Mao Zedong. And with that particular commonality, he picked up Cantonese, as did I. I left Shanghai when I was 5, so I assumed that before that I was speaking the dialect of Shanghai. Although my father is coming from north of Shanghai in the river Yangtze, and from the town very close to present-day Ningbo. The town is called Jiao, Zhejiang, which from the rest of my presentation here and there, you will find out the linkage on conscience and how much of the consciencology, this term translating literally from Chinese to English called consciencology. I guess I was one of the first one who make that move, will give more insights, more education, more learning amongst us and in between us. So the second, the other, I list article from the 3C communications happened in my master degree earning days, 74, 75. And then as of late, 5 years ago during COVID, with all the aggregate cultural exposures, I formed and shape a universal counseling language in psychology, which I've named it with the psychology round and square. To tie it in with the cultural sphere, which is if you just visually even here, if you and I get along, you are nodding, we are round and round. But if something I'm speaking, subject matter, you may a little bit hesitant, you may change that from instead of round, we have a little square. Nothing is permanent. We have 60,000 stimuli in and out our human everyday sensor admission and retention. So we go through this round and round, we get along round and square, you're a little bit hesitant. Wait a minute, where's Paul coming from? Or where his political stance? What are his values? But as long as square, not turning into sideways, become a triangle, which is like a spear. So when you and I are arguing, we may both turn into square, we may not. So that square twisted is a triangle, which is a spear. And these are the basic shapes, as simple as the way I have stated. I thought this language of the communication in part with the psychology, where I have adapted from the spheres used, round shape used in the transactional analysis by Eric Burns, an American psychologist located in Carmel, California in that time. So this development further evolved into now what I'm looking at is the pedagogy of conscience. Why? Because I have just discovered conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is not a methodology. Conscience is the aggregate thinking that we have, be that we think back, that we reflect collectively, be that we think introspectively, and then we also, the present tense of thinking can also have imagination. Because of this sequence of thinking, which I will in the future present it in a much more visual graphic, and this allow me to put these spheres of psychology, of culture, of linguistics, of languages, and the development of the psychology round and square, the 3 C's, will become much easier for all to understand the way we are evolving in our thinking. And because of this lack of awareness of the conscience as a language, I had even created the terminology called thinkology. Logi is knowledge, logo, or logica, the thinking, because in Spanish and Portuguese and Italian, we share the same common language in this word. Thinkology is pensacologia, or pensacologia in Italian, or pensacologie in French. I'm just making part of that up because when we think, if conscious awareness can coming out of thinking, and the level of thinking, I had to create this new vocabulary, a new word to accommodate what we're looking for, the pedagogy of the study and the mechanism to discover conscience. Conscience exists from the day of the Greeks. But what I have discovered by me in the open forum, inviting all scholars, all academicians, or non-academics, just common folks, to find out about conscience. Because what I had discovered, even in hypothesis at this moment, we Chinese, our language is spoken, is being used as the language of conscience. Because the Chinese talk about conscience when you translate the 2 words called kindness and heart, liang xin. Let me verify one more time. Maybe I have the audacity by how much I have learned. Also, I have the moral courage to think, to put the Chinese liangxin, the conscience, into a language, because I need to translate the conscience from that Chinese context to the Western context. Even though we know, talk about a metaphor, looking for conscience from the time of the Greeks to the latest, most visual image is Jimmy the Crickets from Walt Disney's novel, adapting from a novel of the Pinocchio. In my construct now with the AI tools is more than just me changing. This communication we have today, if for those who appreciate it, oh, I would like a copy of that. Yes, you can copy it phonetically. Maybe in the next hour or so, we do the CC in multiple languages. But what is coming with technology very soon, and I hope without putting the split between the US Americans and the Chinese, the development of AI, Huawei and any other group can, if I speak, give myself a space of 1/60 a second in each and every of the sentences can be immediately translated into your language. In other words, if there's 160 ethnic groups listening to this tape, they can click eventually by the bottom of the window, their language, and the way I am speaking will be in their language. And the future technology can even shape my movement, vocal, my boca is mouth in Latin and other languages. If my lips can be even reshaped and retouched to the local language. And for those who can, like we have the consumer product today, say, well, I like this guy, but I want to see a prettier face. They can put somebody of their own ethnic group, what they consider to be beautiful, a young lady or handsome young man, whoever, by speaking what I'm speaking. They might be even to using graphics to changing my face, my head, and we can prepare. They can put somebody else in it. But what is important that in this great time and dynamic time, social media, TikTok, have changed the information giving and information sharing that we have today. So why I am going to speak of the subject matter of the Shang dynasty and relating to cannibalism, which happened to be 3,300 or 3,000 years ago, and what is cannibalism during the Shang dynasty have anything to do with me linking the Mesoamerican, meaning the Olmec, the Aztec, and the Mayans. And to a large extent, we have this practice of cannibalism. And let me remind you one more time. Not many that I know of. Cannibalism, you're actually taking consumption of the flesh. But there's a big difference. In the day of China, in the Shang dynasty, which have 600 years of duration of the time, and what has been more the latest discovery, as far as archaeology and as far as cultural anthropology in China has not stopped, because by the international standard of the cultural anthropology, they put the Chinese culture by visual symbolism and languages, which the oracle bones also started by the early shamanism of the Shang dynasty. So we based on the oracle bone discovery is the drawing line of the Chinese civilization and culture. And above and beyond that, which we think we have a culture much longer than 5,000 or 6,000 years and even longer, we have found evidence of the jade. We have found evidence of the bronze. I mean, the abundance of jade, the abundance of the bronze. As of late, the Sanxing Tui we found in Sichuan, and along the region where my home base is, Yuyao, Zhejiang, Hangzhou. We have jade that 5,000 years old with a very intricate carving. We cannot even imagine what kind of tool they use to make those fine lines. But what happens is the international standard is we have to find written scriptures to authenticate that you are your history and the length of history, like the Sumerians, like the Egyptians, dating back 6,000 and more. So that is the what the interesting about Chinese with their excavations and with all the ongoing cultural anthropology. We are still in that process, digging and finding more evidence. But in this particular time and point of the Shang dynasty, where the excavation had discovered many of the bronze urns contains the human heads. Along the way, they also found all the quote unquote established noble houses or people of affluence or people of ruling class have many cadavers, and many of them are beheaded. Okay. And later on in the second part of the history, from the Shang dynasty to the Zhou dynasty, which is the one of the greatest era where Confucius had emulated and quoted the ritual, the gentility of the noble, the generosity of the king, the rulers who had parceled out their land to the family, the immediate family, on both sides of the family, eventually to the nobles. Well, as a result, the Zhou dynasty, after 600 plus years, it turned into the warring state. Maybe it's just human nature. When you have so much land, your big eye, you envy who's got more land, who's got less. What I'm trying to finding out by my own hypothesis is, which is more rational thinking, and also in part maybe I use reason. These words will come into play: rationalization, irrationality, and reason. And just playing with words, reason in the Romance language coming over the word roots is almost sounding like the deeper the root, the bigger the tree, the more resistant to the outside intrusion. But let me put this in a very hypothetical order, because as of late we have discovered the thousands and thousands of corpses, skeletons, many are beheaded, and because we find the human heads in these green bronze urns of the Shang era. So we do know that much of that have spoken about the sacrifices, but also not in precise manner. There were even phrases or poems have given some indication that there were festivals had human flashes being hanged in the on top of the palace, and the wine in the pools. I want to bring this to the attention about my hypothesis about the immigration of the Asian coming through the Bering Straits. In any given time in that region of Shanghai or to the coastal China were very shallow. There was another discovery that I found. So the ocean, whatever, after the big flood, may have a much wider continent, shallow continent that can come across from Bering Strait. That's one hypothesis. But the other hypothesis, with different stage of the Chinese history written and about Chinese came to Fusong. Well, at one point they referred to Fusong as the island of Japan. Also in the era of the Qing dynasty, after the warring states, the first one Chinese emperor ruler, Shang, which is what the phonetically sign eventually come in Shing, Shin, China, China, because Portuguese is called China, and in Italian it's China. in Spanish, China, and so forth. The sound phonetically had given away some of the linkage because this ruler wanted his desire for immortality, who had sent young couples numbering maybe, I mean, a numerical error, 300, 600 pairs east toward China, which, according to the many Chinese hypotheses or speakers, even just being nationalistic, that we think Japan was created by these 300 pairs of youngsters. One of the fair warning is that they are so afraid they cannot find the drug, the medicine of immortality. They do not want to head back to China. So there's another hypothesis about the Bering Straits being shallow, and the Chinese in the lower region in the area of Shandong, basically that is in the Shandong Peninsula, that's where the end of the Shang dynasty. What in the Shang dynasty's documentation indicating they have 250,000 men who were refused to either the Shang rulers' command for warring against the people from Zhou. Now you have to understand the Zhou dynasty become a best-known civility in terms of a composure, mannerism, the rituals of dining, wining. Confucius had written most elaborately. And there's one, I don't call it hidden fact. The Zhou people was in the region, they were the assigned people to capture slaves in the other outskirts of the Shang region. So, were there cannibalism? I have just indicated no, but there were written words about a certain party of the last emperor of the Shang dynasty had indicating human flesh, meat in particular, and then the big festival with the wine big enough to become a pool. Another observation of mine, my own imagination, strongly believing the migration, the possible, the 250,000 soldiers and family leaving the Shang dynasty have gone eastward. And this is where they have gone into Mesoamerica, the Middle America, or Central America, because by another collaboration I have with Gavin Menzies and his team, in fact, his manager, Ian Hudson, Menzies, who wrote 1421, we have done some collaboration of our work exploring in the Amazons, in Brazil, in Latin America, because I have visited Guatemala and the jade mines in Antiguas since 1973. Since then, I've been back, and I have my friends and other make purchases of the Mesoamerican jadeite. Now, this is the same quality, not quality, even the colors different. They're blue, green, they have blue colors. But the jadeite, only two parts of the world found jadeite, which the Chinese church, is from Burma, present-day Myanmar. And the only other place in North America, in Central America, that we found jade is the jadeite coming out of Guatemala, in fact, from the city of Antiguas, or in that region. So in this particular segment, my knowledge of Brazil is not bad, more than average, because my interest in cultural anthropology. And for those who have the access to video, trying to watch a film that I have watched called My French Husband. It is very interesting. It's about a white man of the French origin was captured by one of the coastal Brazilian natives. The natives, the language we know in Brazil called Tupi-Guarani. Guarani is fully spoken in Paraguay. It's one of the two of the languages, Spanish and Guarani. But the Tupi-Guarani have the greatest presence in the entire region of Brazil. And one of the tribes who have practiced, again, not always, but the tribe is called Tupinamba, is further up north in the region of in the northeast part of Brazil. The story was telling this native lady who had taken this French man to become a lover, to become a husband, like who share their shacks, the huts, for over a period 1 to 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, this Frenchman was being targeted to become a sacrificing person in one of the future ceremonial rituals. But to make the story short, eventually she was saying goodbye to the husband. I'm not sure that was a linguistic communication at that time. And also in the book, she made the very clear indication she wants a part of his body to be her desire sharing of the meal of the evening. Okay, so I'm highlighting this that give me some indication there was this partial cannibalism, not full-time cannibalism, and the Tupinamba at that particular time and point, they will kill their enemies and have taken part of the flesh to give themselves greater courage. Going back to this potential migration by the ocean now, not the Bering Strait, by the same hypothesis, I have witnessed none of the cannibalism or the consumption of the human flesh, even in times of necessity, not by the Eskimo or the northern Northwest Indians, much less by the Plains Indians. We talk about the Shoshone, the Cheyenne, the Lakotas, Cherokee, and whomever. But in this particular area of Central America, of Mexico, of Olmecs, with the Aztecs, with the Mayans, can this be one of the evidence to show the migration from the Shang dynasty 3,300 years ago had come by the ocean to this region of Central America, or even maybe to the southern part of Brazil? But this brings in another hypothesis. We talk about cannibalism in the different region of the world. Food cannibalism or part cannibalism also exists in Papua New Guinea, as well as existed in the Indochina region, be that Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, in the old Burma. And I'll give you another evidence, which is far more reason. Talk about the language of the practice of the human consumption, put it that way. If you all remember the one of the major air force, China had no air force during Second World War against Japan. The limited forces were given to China was created by Chiang Kai-shek's American-born wife, Song Mei-ling. Song Mei-ling, based on what I knew, had put forth her own money. Well, it can be because she get a lot of money begging from the Franklin regime. In fact, she was mostly despised by the Eleanor Roosevelt because her entourage of people. I guess you cannot dress like a princess when you beg for money. In the early part of the Flying Tiger were based in Burma, and by what I knew, people again linking to the story of the Germans in the Himalayas. That was a grand plan by the Europeans, along with the Americans and the British. They want to segregate the two parts of China away from China. One was Tibet. The second one was Xinjiang. The reason for the Himalaya dominance is very simple. by the imperialists, I forgot, including Russia. Whatever happened in the part of the Versailles Treaty and beyond of the U.S. and the Western European allies, because their plan was to, if you can cut off the water supply from the Himalayas, with the water flowing to the east, China, with the water flowing down to the south to India, and directly south to Indochina, you can dominate the entire region. Be that grandiose plan, be that very, very not solid planning, but the plan was in place. And part of the mission of the Flying Tiger, the retired American pilots to base in Burma, was the just-in-case scenario with China, with the global dispute and the many uncertainty of the rising of China in that time and period of time. But when Japan invaded China, I know more about this part of China because Japan continues bombarding. My mother is from the southwest China, from the city of Guilin, and they were all fear this huge conflict and the increased Japanese invasion spreading into China. But eventually, the Japanese, they make a huge mistake. By the sheer power, by the size of Japan, and by the over promised themselves to take Shanghai in 90 days, Shanghai, where I was born. And they end up, they take over all China is in 90 days. Just to fight Shanghai alone, the Japanese have delayed more than 90 days. Maybe that's called the revenge, the rancor the Japanese had. And when they come into Nanjing, come into that part of China, they have done devastating genocides and the mass murder of the people in Nanjing. But talking about the Flying Tiger was in the American unit, fully funded by the nationalist China. Even though nationalist China, Taiwan, and Mao Zedong's team were united to fight Japanese in Shanghai, which my father, French-speaking, English literate returnee from China, had pledged also great support for this effort. But the initial part of the Flying Tigers, by me, I can call them in pompous ass, because this particular unit of the Chinese Air Force, they demand their daily diet to have dairy. That means steak and dairy, butter were flown in daily from New Zealand, or weekly, just to supply these units of the Flying Tiger in southwest China. People can speak of the good of the Flying Tiger. Wonderful. I'm not here to speak of the ill. I'm just trying to highlight this part of the story. So when they get on the plane, by whatever mission they do, they fly over Indochina, they fly over southwest China, and not to forget, in the region of China, in Guizhou, Yunnan, and also in the Guangxi, that region, they are more tied to the ethnicity with the Thai, with the Cambodian, in the region. So there were the mountain tribes, which eventually many of them fought for the American side, like the Cambodians. They demand stay in the U.S. because they were fighting intelligence for the American with Vietnam later on. But that in that particular time and point, the Flying Tigers, when their pilots got shot down by the Japanese, when they were landed into the jungle of that region, I'm talking about China, in the Indochina, in the region, they were captured. And eventually they found out, many of them, maybe because they have blonde hair, blue eye, the mountaineer, the mountain tribes, never knew who they were killed, eventually cooked, literally cooked. When this news coming out, spreading into the Chinese military, or the commanding region by section, by the Taiwan, eventually the nationalist China, Chiang Kai-shek and his American wife, Song Mei-ling, they finally get to find a solution to this kind of capture and eating American pilots. So if you go back, you can go to Google, looking the flight jackets of the Flying Tiger pilots at that time. Inside and outside, there may be double messages, is the Chinese national flag from Taiwan and the flag of the U.S. With a hand shaking like so, indicating that China and America are friends to have saved the many lives when the pilots were fallen. And I dare assume there'll be other eventually to continue this subject matter to let other veterans or the children of the Flying Tiger can speak of these events. But to use this cannibalism did take place in the the Southeast Asia, in the mountain tribes in China. And then we knew about the Papua New Guinea, where there were practice of cannibalism. And I assume there can be, even with this Micronesia region of the migration into the South America and the Incas and the Brazilians region where I had traveled the most, they do have all Asian features, and the DNA are proven more and more the Chinese blood types from Siberia all the way down to, I don't want to say Patagonia, but there was another story later on we can tell about the many sad stories about the mass murder of the natives in the region, the southern part of Brazil, all the way to Argentina. But that's another story. But here, what I'm trying to highlight is going to be interesting about the Shang era Chinese and their presence in North America. And what is most important now, with my attachment, I'm not using many other figures into the screen, but this is the one of the major discovery by an American teacher, educator, Rumskamp, where he had found this oracle bones characters all throughout the southwest of the US and in Mexico. This oracle bones characters are very much totally authentic to the era of the oracle bone characters 3,300 years ago. And now we're getting more and more participants coming from Peru, coming from Mexico. And I would like to bring the part of the Brazilians into this area because the pictographs, many of the rock writings with big discovery just found in Peru and also in the northeast side of Brazil. But so far, I have not seen any of the symbolism or the characters we are presuming of the Shang dynasty, the oracle bones characters were there. But the huge presence, and from the page of Rushcamp, and I will put on even more feature footages, because this is the linkage about knowing my Chinese, my Spanish, my Portuguese, my Italian, my Latin roots, whatever language plus or exposure plus, and the cultural anthropologists and the many events. One of the feature I'm going to bring out, because I bring in the Gavin Mancy team, Ian Hudson, and the little part that we share with the exploring of the 1421 hypothesis, where they have discovered by accident some of the underwater relics from Portland, Oregon, and all the way down to the region of Mexico, where they found the huge rocks hollow out in rings were used as almost the anchors close to that period of time, Shang, or around that time. So what I'm bringing to here to you is that we are doing the bits and pieces. Okay, do not overlook the many discovery. And during my time with Gavin Manzy's exploration, I have discovered far more evidence from the book of Shanghai Jing in Brazil and in North America than I can say about, the Chinese turn the corner of the Cape, and because the weather, they were accidentally getting into Latin America, no different than Pedro Álvares Cabral, who discovered Brazil in 1500. Just on this note, I hope somebody who can make this linkage will be interesting, because 1421 is not so far off from the Portuguese already early finding of Brazil as early as in 1450s and 60s. So far, that's what I know. As a youngster, when I was at 14, when I traveled from Macau, Hong Kong by the ocean, 45 days to Brazil, our ship stopped in the middle of the ocean Atlantic by the island it's called Tristan da Cunha in Portuguese, Tristan da Cunha, which was sunk in that year. I'm not sure that was completely sunk, but we went there to rescue 3 British scientists, throwing the net, climbed up, then we went on to Rio de Janeiro. But based on the book I'm reading by the Portuguese, by the name of Macarenhas Barreto, who actually posed Columbus, not only he was never Italian from Genoa, but he is actually a Portuguese from the region called Alentejo in the town named Cuba. That's one hypothesis you can read on. There'll be more coming up. But what in this particular time and point, the Portuguese had discovered the Canary Islands. And because of the powerful forces of the richer Spanish kingdom of the Ferdinand and Isabella, the Portuguese had to back off. But the Portuguese already along the coast exploring had already gone into the region of Africa, Lagos, Ghana. And from Ghana, they already had landed into Tristan da Cunha, the island in the middle of the Atlantic, and had ventured on eventually to Brazil. So from his writing, which I have not finished, the hypothesis that Portuguese already know about Brazil. And here comes the interesting bits and pieces. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, by Spanish, in Portuguese, Tordesillas is written LHA. And this treaty was set between 1492, Columbus' discovery of the Caribbeans, and 1500, Pedro Alves Cabral, who discovered Brazil by accident because he wanted to follow Vasco da Gama. And before 1500s, 1490, I forgot exactly, is when Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese explorer, had got into Calcutta, India, eventually onto the Asian shores. What is interesting, all these navigators, including Columbus, based on my personal assumption, they were all coming from the school of the navigation of Henry the Prince from Portugal, from the area Sagre, which is the southern tip of Portugal, who also had explored the entire coast of Africa, and their previous knowledge about Tristan da Cunha, the island linked with supplies to Brazil. It was that, and then the time the King John of Portugal was already fairly old. What the Portuguese, when they were deciding to make the clear line of the Treaty of Tordesillas in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, west of the Tordesillas is going to be in Americas, and the east of the Tordesillas line is Africa, Asia, and where the Portuguese have their share of the colonization and global reach. Well, they want to go to India. They want to go to the East Indies. As such, we get American Indians, another misnomer. They were looking for spice. They're looking for all the other goods, where the Silk Road was cut off by the Ottoman Empire. And on this, from the treaty, the Portuguese fought. Then the Paul VI, talk about the Roman Pope, who has been paid, bribed, persuaded by the Juderia, the group of the Jews, refused to be converted and wanted to have part of the state and be engaged with Portugal and with Spain and all that from the time of the Inquisition. The same year, 1492, with the Spanish took over Granada and decided to exercise the Inquisition, the forced conversion of the Arabs and the Jews into Catholicism. But actually, that warning was given away 100 years ago. It was the time in 1492, Isabella decided to exercise such a forced conversion. Well, this is our modern terms. But to see the Portuguese fought the papal bull, Borgia, Paul VI, vehemently for the extra 200 leagues west of the treaty line, which basically enveloped the entire region of Brazil. These are the, call it historical forensics, or call it your own personal investigation, and everything comes into a cultural sphere. Remember, see this? Because what I know, what I've learned from the Asian side, from the Brazilian side, from the Spanish side, and in the next few pieces, I will be also speaking one of the largest Spanish influence in the Pacifics with the name. You can Google many of these topics, called the Manila galleons, the ships coming on in and out from Manila, Philippines, Las Filipinas, and the Spanish conquest, and their viceroys, or the capitanías, involving the widening of the Spanish Empire of the old Pacific, and the transport of goods from Manila to directly to Acapulco, and by way of land Acapulco, crossing over to Veracruz, Havana, and eventually with the goods boarding directly back into Spain. You can call it the another Chinese Silk Road from the sphere of the Chinese. And I'm saying this by the number of Chinese settlement outside of Manila, Cobarion, they were 50% to 60% of the entire population of Manila. Another interesting item of the many silk products coming predominantly from the area Fujian, today coastal Fujian, people who speak Fujian dialect, or Mennan, some in Taiwan, not as the Toisan Cantonese who emigrated mostly to the part of the American West Coast due to the reason for go, and then eventually end up to be railroad workers. But I think this part of the what I'm trying to put in today in sharing of the cannibalism possible, and back to 3,300 years ago of the Shang dynasty, and I was just inspired to pick up the reading from John Rumskamp, and the more of the articles coming out had got me into the Manila galleon, as all of us, the audience, can see how rich and how wide the Spanish Empire then. But then I take a little bit of my association with Portuguese because of Brazil, because of Portugal, and not to forget Spain, the Philippines. Las Filipinas was honoring the King Philip II, who was a prince at that time. All the discovery for the West known as Magellan. Magellan is Portuguese. Magellan, yes, was hired by the Spain, the money capital. And Magellan's name is Ferdinand Magalhães from Portugal. And Magellan also have done the same technique of the Portuguese done in the African coast by coasting down, continues on to the south side of South America, and found the passage that went across to Pacific. What I'm highlighting this is the idea, what the presumption, the hypothesis by here and there by other travelers to the New World before the big names of Columbus. Spain was vehemently to want to continue to overcome their mistakes called Las Americas, to go to Las Indias, and they found us as Filipinas. The navigation technique of Magellan and the landing into the Pacific coast, which had given Spain the widest territory. And remember, even at 1560s until 1810, the largest empire in North America were the Spaniards. California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas were all part of the Spanish Empire. And the goods, by the products they generated from the Philippines, Manila become a entrepot of the goods, again, predominantly from China, but with missionaries, with the writing of the Franciscans or Dominicans, fully documented in the region, the outside wall of Manila, the Parion, where the Chinese were. I'm just making a basic assumption, 50 to 60% of the Chinese products were coming out of Manila into the New World by way of Acapulco, boom, crossing over of the Merida, the Yucatan Peninsula, to Veracruz, or to Havana to secure their way into Spain. And the last one, I just want to highlight that you can read about it, we can talk about it, is the amount of silver of the Capitania of the Spanish Empire in Peru. At that time, the Capitania, the region control of the Spanish Empire, where the silver all came from, was from Potosi, Bolivia today. And that silver had created the greatest demand by China. If there were only 30%, based on my small statistics, only 30% of the Bolivian silver, today we know as Bolivia, from Peru, had gone on to the Nueva España, Mexico, and gone on 30% into Spain. And 60 to 70% had gone eastwards into Manila and into the hands of the Fujian ethnic Chinese, and eventually sold to the Ming Dynasty, and with their silver, the Chinese needed. And later on, of course, I can talk about the silver route, and then all the silver eventually were captured by the British, by the British obsession with tea drinking. One more little crime. Tea drinking was induced by Catalina de Braganza, who's married to the king. And that vice had turned tea into an obsession. And such obsession had the British lost all their silver, and they had to find opium, first found in Turkey, then eventually planted in British India, in Bangladesh, and so did the Chinese, so they can recapture their silver. And that was the only commodity that Chinese would ever want. This is the think link, very common in our Chinese use. We talk about lun sheng, thinking linking. And I hope this would just open up another dimension of the way we are looking now in history with our perspective. And social media, to some degree, is allowing many of us to participate in the sharing of many parts of history. And I thank you in advance, and I hope this will inspire you and let you do your exploration of your history, your heritage, your racial, linguistic background. Thank you. Have a good day. Gustavo, eu estava vendo